There's a correlation between Ethics Week and Valentine's Day. On Valentine's Day, you got to be very deliberate about saying to somebody you love, "I love you." Okay? As a man who's been married for 50 years, I can tell you that's true. My wife has never thought of divorce. Okay? Murder crosses her mind about 3 times a week. Ethics Week, we kind of do ethics 24/7 here, but Ethics Week is when we get real deliberate about looking at ethics in a very, very focused way. So our speaker today is Ken Goodpaster. I got some good news and got some bad news about Ken. Good news is this sort of thing is good. I mean, good is good. He does have an endowed chair in business ethics at the University of St. Thomas. And a quick sample of his RTS, okay, research, teaching, and service. If I went through it all, we'd be here until about 3 o'clock. Research, he recently served as the executive editor for Corporate Responsibility in the American Experience. On teaching at the University of St. Thomas, he teaches a great book seminar to business students and law students. And on the service side, he was awarded the Paul Harris Medal for service to education. That was presented by the Rotary International. More good news. Ken's a donor. Got a bachelor's in math. Taught here. But now here's the bad news, okay? Has an MA and a PhD from the University of Michigan. So we're going to have to overlook that character flaw, okay? And his topic today is From Career to Calling, the Vocation of the Christian Business Leader. Here's Ken Goodpaster.
Thank you, Ken. I think I've got it. Is it coming through the microphones or the speakers okay? It's great to be back. Nice to see the alma mater. It's grown since I left here. I'm looking forward to spending this time with you and to talking about a subject that means a great deal to me. My hope is that, did you want to pass this around? A lot of what I'm going to say can be reinforced after the fact by looking at this document, which is available to you for free on the internet. It's a document that came out of the Vatican a year and a half ago that several of us at St. Thomas were instrumental in writing, helping to write, and it came out over the signature of Cardinal Peter Turkson, who heads up the Pontifical Institute for Justice and Peace. I mention it because it's an amazing breakthrough from the point of view of the Vatican talking to business audience. Most of the church's admonitions and exhortations to business have been more in the form of be good and don't be bad. This document is very different from that, and I hope if you are interested by what I have to say today, you will pursue it, because it holds up business as a vocation, as a noble vocation, much more noble than people have realized. And that's the message I want to bring to you today, that there is a nobility about business as a vocation. But all speakers have to begin with jokes. So let me tell you a joke about a guy named Kenny. I was called Kenny growing up, and so it caught my eye when I saw this story. Apparently a guy named Kenny moved from the city to the country. He wanted to get into a less urban environment, and he bought a house in the country, and he bought a donkey for $100 from and it was supposed to be delivered the next day. So the next morning, the farmer comes to Kenny's house, and Kenny comes out expectant and in a good mood. And the farmer says, I got some bad news for you, Kenny. Overnight, the donkey died. And Kenny, being an optimistic sort, said, well, that's too bad. Just give me my $100 back and we'll be square. And the farmer said, geez, can't do that, Kenny, because I went and spent it. And Kenny thought about it for a moment, and he said, well, all right, then just give me the donkey. And the farmer looked at him kind of strangely and said to him, what do you want with a dead donkey? And Kenny said, I'm going to raffle him off. I just won't tell anybody he's dead. And the farmer he couldn't believe what he was hearing. And he finally gave him the dead donkey and bumped into him, probably 2 weeks later after the county fair. And he walked up to Kenny and he said, well, how did the raffle for the dead donkey go? And Kenny said, it went very well. I made $898. And he said, and the farmer couldn't possibly believe it. He said, I sold 500 chances for $2 a piece, and I feel real good about the whole exchange. And the farmer says to him, well, didn't anybody complain? And Kenny said, well, just the guy who won. So I gave him his money back. And if you are doing the math, it comes out to $898. And so Kenny grew up and became chairman of Enron Corporation. And it's one of the few business ethics jokes I know, but I keep telling it. So thanks for having me today, and let's get into things. What I'd like to do is tell you what I'm going to tell you, and the outline of my remarks is threefold plus a postscript. Okay? First, I'd like to talk about the very idea of business leadership as a vocation. That's not a normal, obvious idea. And I want to set the context for that and explain it in terms of something called co-creation. Then I want to break it down into three elements of that vocation, three practical principles: good goods, good work, and good wealth. And thirdly, I'm going to try to talk about how would you implement this in a real live organization. So I want to go from an idea down to its implementation. And I want to use what amounts to what we call at St. Thomas the ladder of reflection. The ladder of reflection is an idea that serves as the justification for something. The beginnings of fleshing out that idea, which we call the elements, and then how do you implement the elements, we can call that fulfillment. But when you're starting down here, I think I'll use my other pointer. It's easier to see, I think. Yeah. When you start down here and you're asked for justification for what you're trying to do in an organization, you move up to the second level and you explain what you're trying to do by appealing to the second level elements. When your second level elements are questioned, then you go up to the idea to give the justification for the ultimate practical things that you're recommending. When someone questions the practicality of your idea, you move down to the elements and you show them the mid-level ideas that go with it. And when they question your elements the practicality of them, you move down to fulfillment to give people an understanding of street-level implementation of what you're doing. So my hope today is to talk about the vocation not just in the abstract, but in the concrete, but to have you appreciate that there is a ladder going on here and that it's something that we can all benefit from. And then at the very end, what I hope to do is to share with you just a reflection on the implications of all this for business education in a university, both at the undergraduate and the graduate level. So, let's look at the context first. The context is that in this young century alone, many businesses have already brought forth marvelous innovations, have cured diseases, brought people closer together through technology, and created prosperity in countless ways. If we wanted to, we could spend 20 minutes brainstorming about innovations that have taken place since the year 2000, and the list is long and the list is marvelous, from entertainment and video games and iPhones to breakthroughs in medicine that never existed before and saved people's lives. So there's an awful lot of good news, to quote Ken Milani, about business, especially in this new century. But unfortunately, this century has also brought business scandals and serious economic disturbances and an erosion of trust in business as an institution. This trust is lost when business is detrimental to something I'm going to refer to as integral human development. Actually, that phrase comes from Benedict XVI's encyclical Caritas in Veritate, where he tries to communicate that the ultimate touchstone of all of business and political activity should be integral human development, and he builds a lot into that phrase. And this is where the social teachings of the church and our belief in God's love can offer an authentic perspective, enabling business leaders to fulfill their Christian calling. And this is developed in this document that's moving around the room right now and spelled out in much more detail. Part of the context of business as a calling is the metaphor of the golden calf. We're all familiar with that from the Bible. The golden calf is a symbol of misplaced devotion. At least that's how I see it. It's born of a false idea of true success. There are many surrogates for the golden calf in modern life. I remember when I was probably second grade, third grade, being taught by the sisters, and I remember a sister, a nun, telling me the story of the Israelites while Moses was up getting the Ten Commandments at the top of the mountain. The Israelites were getting restless, and at some point, it's as if they decided they needed to worship something. And Moses wasn't coming back, so they decided to make something of their own to worship, and they pooled their jewelry and all of their goods and that had precious metals in them and created this golden calf and began to worship this golden calf. And here's this little second or third grade mind of mine listening to Sister Mary whoever and saying to myself, how could grown-ups do that? How could grown-ups make something, see where it came from, and then turn around and worship it? Because it's clearly not worshipable if it's just coming from their own earrings and necklaces. I couldn't understand as a second and third grader how an adult could worship something like a golden calf. Many years have passed since that second and third grade experience, well over 60 of them. And now I understand what I didn't understand then, that we can make golden calves left, right, and center. Oh, they're not made of metal like in the picture, but they're real, and they act as competitors for the God of our understanding. They emerged when the sole criterion for action in business is thought to be the maximization of profit. That becomes a golden calf. When technology is pursued for its own sake, without any attention to what its consequences may be, when personal wealth or political influence fails to serve the common good, or when utilitarian or consequential reasoning becomes dominant. So there are golden calves. And this is part of the context that I want to set for you when I suggest what the vocation of the Christian business leader is. Each of these golden calves amounts to a kind of a fixation, usually accompanied by a rationalization that this is what businesses have to do. They have to maximize profit. It's built into the legal system. It's built into the institution of business. Each has the capacity, in the words of Benedict, to entrance us. To entrance us. And business leaders must pay careful attention to avoid the lure of idolatry. Idolatry is alive and well in the 21st century, and it's habit forming. And the fact that it's habit forming is an important piece of the message today, because the vocation of the business leader is to form different habits than the habits of idolatry. Back to our ladder of reflection. The other element under the idea is to talk about the call to co-creation. The first thing we talked about with the golden calf is simply a matter of setting some context into which the call is interjected. We can say with Peter Drucker, who observed this a long time ago, that we're living in a society of organizations, that a lot of the big players on the social scene are organizations, private sector, public sector, non-government sector. And in a phrase reminiscent of Aristotle, in a lot of ways, man is an institution-making animal. Why do we make institutions? Because we want things to last beyond our own lifetime. That's the main reason. So we create institutions and organizations that are designed to carry on certain values and certain social goods beyond the lifetime of any member of that organization or institution. Drucker said that the knowledge society perforce has to be a society of organizations. Its central and distinctive organ is therefore management. The central importance of management in the 21st century can hardly be overstated. In his encyclical Laborem Exercens in 1981, John Paul II said this: "The word of God's revelation is profoundly marked by the fundamental truth that man, created in the image of God, shares by his work in the activity of the Creator, and that within the limits of his own human capabilities, man, in a sense, continues to develop that activity and perfects it as he advances further and further in the discovery of the resources and values contained in the whole of creation." The power of that paragraph is amazing if you allow it to sink in. The idea that creation isn't finished, that we're invited to be part of the ongoing creation and maintenance of creation that was begun by God. Business leaders have a special role to play in the unfolding of creation. And this is what I want to call the big idea of their vocation. They not only provide goods and services and constantly improve them through innovating and harnessing science and technology, but they also help to shape organizations that will extend this work into the future. So I want to suggest that the call of the business leader, the Christian business leader, is to be part of a larger plan and to be a co-creator with God. When they realize that they are participating in the work of the Creator, business leaders may begin to realize the grandeur and awesome responsibility of their vocation. You're not just money-grubbing profiteers, as some would characterize business. The call is far more august than that, far grander than that. It's participating in the co-creative work of God Himself. So there are two parts to the Christian business leader's call from the Creator. The first part is to carry on His creation through the fabricating of institutions to respond to the needs of humankind. Let's call that the institutional call. And that takes the form of business organizations, but it also takes the form of nonprofit organizations. So this organization called Notre Dame is one of those. Although those of us looking at you from the outside wonder about the 501c3 part. Anyway, the reality is governments are also institutions that human beings create to carry on creation. And as part of this institution building and maintenance, to impart moral sensibilities to the institutional work of our hands, the call for corporate conscience. So let this sink in. There's two pieces to the vocation, the big idea. One is co-creation, and the other is to make sure that the institutions through which we co-create have moral sensibilities. The first part emphasizes the overall purpose of the calling, while the second part attends to how we pursue that purpose. Christian business leaders are called upon to co-create, but insofar as what they create has a life of its own, and that's what institutions are, things that have a life of their own beyond my life and your life, they must be able to see that it is good in the same way that day after day in the creation, as articulated in Genesis, God saw that it was good. So institution making is one primary form of humankind's sharing in the unfolding of the work of creation. And just as God plants conscience in our hearts as individuals, at that moment when finger touches finger, metaphorically in Michelangelo's painting, so too we as institution makers are called to plant conscience in our institutional co-creations. I've, in other things that I've written, called this the fabrication of a corporate conscience. And I've defined leadership as leaders are the architects of corporate conscience. And one of the primary functions of leaders is to plant conscience in our institutional co-creations. So, the very idea is that faith enables Christian business leaders to see a much larger world, a world in which God is at work and where their individual interests and desires are not the sole driving force. The vocation of the Christian business leader is to see the world differently, to see the world more accurately, to see the world as the unfolding of a drama that's much bigger than economics, much bigger than politics, much bigger than every other human activity taken solely in itself. It's a co-creative activity. And the Christian business leader has an opportunity and indeed an imperative to look at the world and see it whole rather than seeing it partialistically, piece by piece. Okay, back to the diagram, back to the ladder. Okay, we're moving down the ladder. Now you might say, well, that's all very nice, sort of a noble endeavor. We'd like to see co-creation go on, but what does that mean if I'm running a store or I'm running a corporation that makes hinges for laptops, as one of the companies in St. Paul area where I come from does. I mean, they're really good at what they call constant torque hinges. And if you have a laptop and you open it and put the upper part with the screen on it in any position, it tends to stay in that position. Well, it takes some real engineering to make that happen. And that the hinge in your laptop was probably made by this company. But the question is, well, all right, you've got this august idea of business as a co-creative calling. How does someone who's running a company that makes hinges make that sensible in his or her business world? And that's the purpose of looking at these elements that I'm going to call good goods, good work, and good wealth as the elements that take the idea from the highest level and move it down closer to concreteness. And eventually I'm going to push it to real concreteness at the street level. But before we get to the street level, we've got to spend some time on the elements. So we're going to look at the elements. God asks us to continue His creation and make it better for others. For the business leader, this means advancing the goods that business does. And I'm going to call them those three goods. True goods and services, making goods which are truly good, and services which truly serve. You know, if you've taken, how many of you are business students? Virtually all of you. Well, if you've taken marketing or if you've taken other general business courses, you know that goods and services are typically defined as what people will exchange money for in the marketplace. All right? If someone's willing to exchange money for it, then it has market value. How much money determines how much market value it has. If someone offers a service and someone's willing to exchange money for that service, then that service has market value. Notice how you can go through an entire business education without asking, but are those goods truly good? I mean, I get it, they sell, but are they truly good? Or do those services truly serve? I get it, people will buy them. But there's another question that's left over after we use phrases like goods and services. And it's the question about, are the goods truly good? Does that question even make sense? And where does it get raised, if not in a faith-based school of business? The second good is good work. Organizing work where employees develop their gifts and talents. So another dimension of the Christian leader's vocation is not just to pay attention to the goods and services and make sure that they're truly good and truly serve, but to look at the way in which the company itself is organized and whether or not the dignity of the human beings working in that company is being honored. And finally, good wealth, which means creating sustainable wealth so that it can be distributed justly to stakeholders and for collaborating with the public and non-government sectors. I'll say more about each one of these. First, good goods. The conventional business language of goods and services are that things are valued by the market in the sense that persons or groups are willing to exchange money for them, but if nobody will buy, then their market value is zero. At that time, anyway. But we know that sometimes markets can be unreliable metrics for value. The fact that nobody will buy at a given time may mean that people's priorities are askew. The problem is with the people in the market, not with the product or the service. Or, the other way around, the fact that a good or a service like pornography or prostitution sells may again mean that people's priorities are askew. Market appeal is perhaps a measure of a community's appetites and perceived needs, but it may be a poor measure of a community's health or well-being. If questions about markets can't be raised in a faith-based business school with attention to the vocation of the business leader, where can they be raised? Health and well-being are norms in the realm of ought, not in the realm of is, that call for an account of a good or truly happy human life, what some philosophers and theologians call a normative theory of the good. John Paul II wrote this in Centesimus Annus, 1991. Of itself, he says, an economic system does not possess criteria for correctly distinguishing new and higher forms of satisfying human needs from artificial new needs which hinder the formation of a mature personality. Thus, a great deal of educational and cultural work is urgently needed, including the education of consumers in the responsible use of their power of consumption. And among producers and among people in the mass media, as well as the necessary intervention sometimes by public authorities. So what the Pope is saying here is an economic system in and of itself is neutral about the goods and services that go on within it. You know, I'm sure you've heard it mentioned many times that a democracy as a form of political organization is only as good as its citizenship, is only as good as the people doing the voting, and that democracy, Plato thought, was the worst form of government because it was a form of mass government by the masses. And so we say garbage in, garbage out. Democracy is a political manifestation of that. Markets are an economic manifestation of that. Garbage in, garbage out. So what the Pope is saying here is economic systems in and of themselves don't get kudos and they don't get condemned. They're just neutral. We have to put something into them if we want to add value. And this admonition about the moral limitations of economic systems also invites careful attention to the solidarity of all members of the human family, not just affluent individuals or affluent countries. So there's a second issue here besides goods and services, and has to do with who's benefiting from the market behavior. So we have to deal with solidarity with the poor, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the subject, but I want to make sure it gets mentioned here. As society becomes ever more globalized, says Benedict, it makes us neighbors, but does not make us brothers. I thought this was a particularly insightful observation. Globalization is the watchword of business studies today. It makes us neighbors, but does it make us brothers? Someone who embraces the Christian vocation to business leadership has got to look for ways to pay attention to the brother part, not just the neighbor part. Reason by itself is capable of grasping the equality between men and of giving stability to their civic coexistence, but it cannot establish fraternity. Where does that come from? This originates, he says, in a transcendent vocation from God the Father, who loved us first, teaching us through the Son what fraternal charity really is. Pardon me while I reload my water. All right. So we've talked about good goods as one of the three ways of taking this vocation from the sky and bringing it down to earth a bit. That may be all we have to talk about. I don't know. John Paul also says that in singling out new needs and new means to meet them, one must be guided by a comprehensive picture of man, which respects all the dimensions of his being and which subordinates his material and instinctive dimensions to his interior and spiritual ones. If all we do is appeal to people's instincts and appetites, while ignoring the various ways that the reality of a person manifests itself, then consumer attitudes and lifestyles can be created which are objectively improper and often damaging to his physical and spiritual health. These popes may not be CEOs, but they're onto something important here. They're onto something important. Because in business school, we typically don't try to communicate a comprehensive picture of humankind. We typically tend to trust markets as simply the best guess we have as to how you serve human beings. And there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, if you lived in the Soviet Union and you saw that it was the 5-year plan rather than marketing that was guiding economic production, you might say, you know, give me marketing or give me death. So, you know, the story about marketing is not a story about a waste of our efforts. It's a story about freedom and about choice. But alongside that story, there has to be a critical eye about goods that are good and services that serve. Moving on to good work, and I'm aware of the time now, so I'm going to go a little more quickly. It's a scandal, said Pope Pius XI, when dead matter comes forth from the factory ennobled while men there are corrupted and degraded. The grandeur of human work not only leads to improved products and services, but develops the workers themselves. Work produces goods and services, but work also develops the worker. And that's going on right alongside the production of goods and services. So a significant challenge for someone with a business vocation is to create work that is both good and effective, efficient and engaging, autonomous and collaborative. The way human work is designed and managed has a significant impact on whether an organization can compete, yes, but also whether people will flourish through their work in that organization. So there's an objective and there's a subjective dimension of work. We won't go into this in detail now, but the objective dimension is pretty much the goodness or the lack of goodness in what it is we produce as a business organization. The subjective dimension is whether or not in the process we are ennobling our employees, or whether we are not treating them as human beings with dignity. In one sense, then, there's no difference between the one who pours the coffee and the one who runs the coffee company. Both are workers, and their work has the potential either to develop or to suppress their personal growth and dignity. This attention to human dignity is the watchword of good work. On to good wealth. The creation of wealth by business is not restricted to financial profit alone. It has a lot to do with the stakeholders of the business enterprise and distributing the returns of the business enterprise not only to shareholders but also to employees, okay? And in a way to customers and to the local community. Even though not all human needs can be satisfied by corporate initiatives, however, the very existence of such needs may nevertheless call upon the consciences of business leaders to collaborate with other institutions for the sake of the common good. What I'm trying to say here is not only does the business leader who takes his or her vocation seriously have a responsibility for the stakeholders within his or her span of control, there's more on the table than that. Because some of the problems we face today, in fact, I would argue many of the problems we face today, are not problems that can be solved by any sector by itself. Public sector, business sector, not non-governmental sector or civic sector. In other words, sometimes a problem has to be viewed as one that I have to collaborate with government and with non-government organizations in order to address, and I can't do it by myself. In the past, people have said, well, I can't do it by myself, so I'm off the hook, right? You can't ask me to solve the problem of violent video games. I'm a producer of violent video games, but you know, parents have a stake in this and government has a stake in this. I can't be the nanny of the world. If the market supports my activity, if all my stakeholders are happy, then what do you want from me? My shareholders are getting a bonanza. My customers line up to get the next edition of Mortal Kombat or whatever the game may be. My employees are doing cutting-edge computer programming with graphics that'll knock your socks off. My local community is getting taxes out of me like crazy. Go through the conventional stakeholder list, and my God, I'm doing well. That's called social responsibility, right? And most of us want to say, wait a minute, there's a coarsening, there's a risk here about this product that needs to be looked at much more holistically than simply one stakeholder at a time. The big picture needs to be looked at so that what we're talking about is good wealth, the wealth of the community. And am I contributing to good wealth? Now, my competitor down the road, Nintendo, makes a game called Wii, W-I-I, and it's just fun. And it's fun for grown-ups and teenagers and little kids, and there's a contribution there to the wealth of the community. But right next door is the producer of video games that even the Supreme Court recently suggested was getting farther and farther from entertainment and more like training in violence, the kind of training that soldiers get before they go into action. And that gets scary because the First Amendment doesn't apply to training people to kill. So good wealth. How am I contributing to good wealth? We've got good goods, good work, good wealth. And if you get a hold of that document that's been passed around, you'll see how this triad of goods gets broken down further into two principles associated with each one of them. I'm not going to go into those in detail now, but I want to give you a flavor for what it is that we're taking out of the sky, this co-creative calling. And we're trying to make it more practical by looking at goods and services, by looking at employment and human dignity in the workplace, and by looking at contributions to the wealth of the community. You'll see a diagram like that, or a graphic like that in the document coming around. This is just another way of expressing good goods, good work, and good wealth. All right. We're almost there. We're finally at the lowest rung on the ladder. And we're going to talk about what does it look like in an organization if I'm a leader and I take my vocation as a Christian business leader seriously. What am I going to do managerially to make it happen? Well, I want to do this in terms of 3 imperatives. Orienting, institutionalizing, and sustaining. Christian business leaders who accept their co-creative vocation and who embrace the elements of that vocation, the 3 we just talked about, good goods, good work, and good wealth, need to commit themselves to 3 practical imperatives: to orient the values of the organization, to say this is our mission statement, these are our values, this is our vision of our organization and its contribution, to institutionalize those values, which means to wire them into the motivation system and the reward and sanction system of the organization, and finally to sustain those core values over time. So it's not enough just to say, this is where we want to go. I've got to make sure that the systems in my organization and the rewards and punishments in my organization are keyed to that place we want to go. And not only that, I want to make sure that after I'm gone, someone else will pick up the baton and carry it on. So it matters who I hire. It matters what our leadership succession plan looks like, and so on. So here's the big picture in one giant graphic. Orienting, institutionalizing, and sustaining are the ways that we get to the bottom rung on the ladder. Orienting means articulating and clarifying and modeling the values that we want this organization to stand for. And we want to do that in a way that pays attention to goods that are truly good and services that truly serve. We want to do that in a way that pays attention to the dignity of work and the giftedness of the worker. And we want to do that in a way that pays attention to distributive justice, sustainability, and sector collaboration, as we were just talking about. But it's not enough to orient the organization in these 3 arenas. We've also got to institutionalize those values. How do you do that? Well, you already know, because you've been studying it. We do that by employee training. We do it by positive and negative employee incentives. We do that by institutional self-assessment aimed at improvement. So we have to do an audit, if you will, not only of our employees in performance evaluation, but we do an audit of the institution itself about whether it's living up to its espoused values. And these same messages repeat themselves in the cells below. Institutionalizing means communicating, educating, measuring, and assessing what goes on in an organization so that it's not just hot air. It's really concrete and actionable. And sustaining, as I said, has to do with who do we recruit? What kind of board of trustees or board of directors do we have? Who goes on the board of directors? The choices of who goes on the board of directors can have more of an influence on the future of an institution than almost any other choice. Don't get me started on that with universities. And community involvement. So hiring, promotion, succession, and external engagement aimed at these core aspirations is critical. So what I'm trying to say is we've got this big idea, co-creation. We've spelled out this big idea in terms of 3 goods that are in general practical, but not practical enough until we spell them out in terms of orientation, institutionalization, and sustenance. I'm almost done. I think I overstayed my time, but I want to do this quick postscript on the implications for business education here at Notre Dame, at my place, and at other faith-based institutions that teach business administration. In our own time, business students are informed by powerful theories and highly trained in technical skills, but some, unfortunately, leave university without the ethical and spiritual formation which would ensure that their insights and skills are used for the welfare of others and the support of the common good. An awful lot of business schools see their relationship to their students as a transaction. We've got the knowledge you need for your career, you've got the money to pay for it, we trade, you leave, be a good alumnus and give. That kind of transactional approach to education is very different from what I would call a transformational approach to education. And it's much less controversial than what you might call a transformational approach to education. Some leave the business school with a formation which predisposes them to live the divided life rather than giving them the fundamentals which could help them build an integrated life. And the divided life is the life that sets faith to one side and concentrates on golden calves instead. Consideration of the ideas presented in this talk and in that document can contribute to a more complete formation of these students, educating them to be highly principled and effective business leaders. I believe that faith-based business schools, undergrad and grad, are in more than a transactional relationship to their students. Students are being formed, they're not just being taught or trained. And the formation has a lot to do with seeing what they're going to do when they leave as a vocation, not simply as a career. Teachers need to inspire their students to discover the good which is within them and to follow the call that they have to use their professional skills and judgment as a force for good in the world. When people hire on as faculty members to a faith-based business school, they're hiring on to something that's formative, not just transactional. I'm not saying that in a Catholic business school, every faculty member or student needs to be Catholic. It's not like that. But I am saying that the philosophy of education that goes on in such an institution has got to pay attention to a larger conception of what the end product is supposed to be, and the worldview with which graduates approach the world. And this is going to call for faith-based business schools to themselves orient, institutionalize, and sustain their commitment to business as a vocation, not simply a career. And that's controversial. So here's the bottom line. It's bottom box. Obstacles to serving the common good come in many forms. Lack of the rule of law, corruption, tendencies toward greed, we know the list. The most significant for a business leader on a personal level is leading a divided life where it doesn't hang together, where I've got golden calf over here and another golden calf over there. And I don't view my life as a vocation. I see it as chasing after different kinds of trophies. The split between faith and daily business practice can lead to imbalances and misplaced devotion to worldly success. The antidote to a divided life and misplaced devotion for Christian business leaders at least, is to embrace business life not simply as a career, but as a calling, as a vocation. Faith enables Christian business leaders to see, and I gave you this quote at the outset, to see a much larger world, a world in which God is at work and where their individual interests and desires are not the sole driving force. Thank you.
A little bit of time for Q&A here. To follow up. It's always hard to get the first question out of the group, so we'll take the second question first. Anybody? We're calling the Koch band back here. Robert?
Well, just to draw you out a little on something that I think you can explain, you spoke of institutional moral sensibility. We usually think of that as belonging to individuals. So how is that built into an institution?
Wonderful question. I think I'm going to write a book about it, and I did. It's called Conscience and Corporate Culture, and it's an attempt to answer your question, which is a seminal question. You know, the values of an institution are not identical, tempting as it seems. They're not identical to the values of the CEO or the values of this manager or this vice president or even the values of this board of directors, although you're getting closer there. The notion of corporate culture as the bearer of values over time, such that when someone hires in and doesn't fit the culture, they end up out again. They don't fit. So culture has a reality of its own, a life of its own, and my way of thinking is that the job of leadership is to influence the culture of an organization in the direction of something like an organization with a conscience. If man is an institutionalizing or institution-making animal, then part of the institution-making is to make it an effective organization. Another part of the institution-making is to have it be a good place to work. But perhaps the central part of the institution making has to do with making sure that institutionally, when tough decisions have to get made, questions about whether it's right or wrong, good or bad, virtuous or vicious, are allowed to be raised and addressed in a way that doesn't see them as beside the point, because profit is the point. They're not beside the point. They're an enormous part of what we do here. So yes, people's moral sensibilities as individuals are going to play a big role in the unfolding of corporate conscience, but they're not, you can't reduce the notion of corporate conscience, it seems to me, simply to an additive function of the consciences of the individuals making it up. Great question, thank you.
Talk about the core values that you have identified as having to be identified and then institutionalized things. What are those core values?
Well, they're probably going to be different for different organizations. For that hinge company that I talked about, a whole lot of attention was paid to good work. And
Talk about Notre Dame. What are the core values that they ought to be, that you were bringing
Notre Dame as a manufacturing organization?
No, as an organization.
No, I'm sorry. I'm playing with you. Well, the core values of Notre Dame should be articulated in its mission statement. The education, Notre Dame was founded to bring in Catholic immigrants and to make sure that they got to be part of a mainstream society, because they weren't going to get that to happen by going to conventional universities at the time. So it It was to shape and reinforce faith while at the same time providing an education second to none. And football was in there somewhere. And so the core values are associated with executive excellence, management excellence, and it may manifest in accounting or finance or marketing or any of the subdisciplines. But also shaping all of that with a larger vision. And that larger vision, it's so easy to set aside, or there's a certain kind of entropy that sets in, kind of wearing out. James Burchell, former provost here, called it the dying of the light. The light will die if left to its own devices. The candle will go out. Someone needs to keep relighting the candle. And that's part of the core values of Notre Dame. It's part of the core values of the institution where I work. And it's not going to happen by just wishing for it or lighting a candle in the grotto. I'm sorry, it's not going to happen that way. It matters who our leadership is. It matters who's on our board of trustees. It matters who our faculty are. At our place, we give a copy of the mission statement to all prospective faculty who come to interview for a job in the business school. And we ask them to talk about it. And it talks about a lot of the things I've been sharing with you here. We ask them to address that right alongside of research, teaching, and service. And we don't say you've got to be Catholic. We say, how do you see yourself fitting in with this mission? Do you feel comfortable with this? What's your contribution likely to be? And every new faculty member who comes on board at our place has to take a seminar, poor things, because I teach it, called the Catholic Intellectual Tradition, which is 4 days of retreat at a executive facility where they come to understand ex corde ecclesiae and a lot of the technical stuff, but also how work has figured in the history of the Catholic Church, how the Church's approach to sin is. And we read the story of Augustine and the story of Dorothy Day, and we even treat them to an understanding of Sister Wendy. And if you know who Sister Wendy is, she's an art critic of the highest order, and a woman who, when interviewed by, what's his name, Bill Moyers, interviews her, and we show this video to the faculty, and they fall in love with Sister Wendy because she flummoxes Moyers. I mean, Moyers can't get his head around this woman. You know, how can she be a contemplative nun and be a TV star at the same time? And we have fun with it. We put on a play with the faculty called A Man for All Seasons. You probably have heard of it. They actually act out the play. They bond as a faculty around core values that are related to the Catholic intellectual tradition. And the feedback we get from the faculty is, wow, I had no idea. And the non-Catholic faculty are probably more excited by it than the Catholic faculty are. They don't feel put upon or like we're proselytizing, nothing like that. It's more a matter of, hey, I want to know whose shoulders I'm standing on when I join an institution. And Notre Dame's tradition is second to none in that regard. And I don't know if I'm answering your question, but it's a good question.
Well, we've heard about good work, good goods, good wealth. Let's give a great hand to Ken Goodpaster.